Hey, it's Fred. Thanks for joining me. Let's see, Boreal Bigfoot Conference is coming up June 10th and 11th at Carlson Center in Fairbanks. Get your tickets online. I'll try to look for the link. I got the flyer somewhere. What else? Let's see. Okay, so what I wanted to share with you today comes from Billy and 3 of his friends, a couple buddies from college and one of their girlfriends. This happened 2 years before the COVID. So when did that happen? 2019, 2020. So around 2017, 2018. They're from Colorado. Billy had been up here to Alaska several times fishing out of Dillingham, just commercial salmon fishing. And on one of his last fishing trips before he retired from it, he was young, he just quit fishing. That's what I meant by retirement. So what he decided to do was go with a couple of buddies he had met over the years commercial salmon fishing up to Lake Nurka, up the Wood River, up the Agulawak and whatnot. And he loved the area so much he went home and bragged about it. You know, anyone with a pair of ears, you know. So finally a couple of his college buddies and one of their girlfriends decided, okay, let's go. Let's go check out all this hype about Alaska or whatever. So it took some time to plan, because it's not cheap getting out in the wilds of Alaska, especially with what they were planning on doing, because it required flying in and, you know, bush piloting, and it involved. So they get it all down, and where they end up, I'll try to throw a screenshot of the area. It would be to the northwestern part of Lake Nurka in a place called Rainbow Basin. They initially thought they had reservations for the cabin at Joe Creek at Ott Bay there in Lake Nurka, but it didn't pan out. Something to do with the website or something. Anyway, so they make it over. They pick a beautiful spot. Lots of rocks, gravelly, not a whole lot of dirt per se. Mossy, spongy, you know, standard Alaska stuff, especially for the Wood Tikchik State Park area. So they get back into this spot, and they set up, they have triple arms, right? They have several triple arms, and they were using, first mosquito. They were using these triple arms to, you know, warn the encroaching bear or whatnot. You know, they did all their safety stuff. They get their camp set up, and this particular spot where they chose to camp was at the bottom of a wash, all gravel, and it looked like it was basically, you know, for spring runoff. And after that, maybe a little bit of trickle from rain, but it looked like a wash that they could camp on, have an open area, and not be enclosed by all the vegetation. So they set up their blackout tent. They had a big old 2-room blackout tent, which a blackout tent is just basically land of the midnight sun. If you don't use a blackout tent or a dark tarp over your tent, it's going to seem daylight 24/7 certain time of year. And they were it was towards the end of July. They had, you know, 5 to 6 hours of nighttime at that point, but, you know, it's still light. So they get it set up, and the first couple nights their triple arm was about a 50-foot circle, right? And they used fine fish line, you know, that kind of thing, just to, you know, if a bear comes in, it'll pow, shoot off a 12-gauge round and wake everyone up and hopefully scare off the predator. Well, Billy's buddy, we'll just name him Chuck. All right, Chuck was the most avid outdoorsman of the other 3 that he took with them, and we'll name Dennis and Maria as the other 2. So you got Billy, Chuck, Dennis, and Maria are the couple. So Chuck, being an outdoorsy guy, he decided, you know, after the first couple nights, he had heard some weird grunting off in the distance, and he wanted a little wider perimeter to be a little more ready, because he said it sounded large, whatever it was. Dennis and Maria, they would, being a couple, they would kind of sneak away and go by themselves, you know, of course armed, You know, they weren't idiots. They were armed, but he would go armed with Maria, and they would go, you know, nature walks, look around at the scenery together as a couple, and get away from just the guys, you know. On the third day, they were out on just such an excursion. They got up before, just as the sun was coming up over the mountains. Beautiful. And as they were walking along, they were walking the same path they had the day before. And they noticed that some of the blackberries and stuff were starting to form. They weren't nowhere near ready, but they were just checking out the berries. And as they're doing so, they kept hearing a very sharp whistle from somewhere. It sounded like it was all around them at once, according to what they said. Now, after the third or fourth whistle, because at first it was sporadic. The first couple were random and not very close together. And then the last 2 to 3 were fairly close in succession, and they didn't sound that far away, so they got a little creeped out by that and retreated back to camp. They were 150 yards from camp, something like that. As they were continuing back to camp, they continued to hear that whistle as though it was just near them. Real sharp, real crisp, but they couldn't hear anything else. There was no sound of movement in the brush. And trust me, that time of year, there's a lot of brush, alder, willows, scrub brush. I mean, you know, you got fireweeds, you got all sorts of stuff. It was a bunch of vegetation. So they couldn't really see anything. They heard the whistles, though, very sharp, very crisp. They get back to camp, and Chuck and Billy happened to be at camp. They were working on the trip perimeters. While they were gone on their little walk, Chuck and Billy, from what Billy said, no sooner than Dennis and Maria were out of view, they were hearing a grunt. This grunt, he said, was so low you could almost not hear it. It was almost below the perception of sound. And they were both feeling it when they were sitting by their campfire in their chairs, just sipping on coffee. They said they were feeling it in the framework of their little fold-out chairs. They're feeling this low grumbling growl sound. Creeped them out. So they yell out, "Hey, bear, 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 hey, bear, bear." Now remember, Billy and Maria are on their little excursion at this time. So they both get up, they're armed, and they're both walking around with their rifles, looking, saying, "Hey, bear, bear, hey, bear, we're here, bear," waiting for the bear to leave or to come in, one of the two, because they felt that this grumbling, growling sound was so close, it had to have been damn near on top of them. Not a sound. Once they got up and started calling out, all sounds stopped. It was dead quiet. He said he doesn't even remember the mosquitoes buzzing at this point. So they were creeped out by that. So they're setting up a wider perimeter with more of these little trip alarms, right? So Dennis and Maria get back. They're like, "Hey, we heard this weird whistle. It kind of followed us almost all the way back here." And then they exchanged stories about what was going on. They all thought it was super weird. So they decided, let's try to figure this out, stay close to camp and all together before any other excursions out, but, you know, 2 by 2 or whatever. Let's figure this out, because if it's a large bear, it could overwhelm 2 of us. So they decided to kind of close the ranks, set up their perimeter, get everything nice and tidy. And because they had not been sleeping the best, they decided towards the midday they were going to try to lay down for a nap. There was some weather moving in. It was looking like it was threatening to rain. It kind of cooled off. They decided they're going to, you know, hey, let's catch some Z's. You know, rejuvenate, start again once we get up. So they go in and they lay down. Now, this is middle of the day. The clouds rolled in. It got drizzly, but nothing too they weren't too socked in. They could still see all the mountains, so the clouds hadn't come down. And as they went in and laid down, they were Chuck and Billy were on one half of this tent. It was a 2-room tent, and Billy and Marie had the back portion. There was entrances on both sides, and then a divider in between that could be taken out. So they had their divider up or whatever, and Billy and Chuck were discussing that weird grumbling. Meanwhile, Billy and Maria, they're talking about not Billy and Maria, forgive me, Dennis and Maria. they were talking about the whistling. So they're having simultaneous conversations about the same time of weirdness, right? They all start laughing because they hear each other talking, and they're like, okay, we're getting really worked up. And they couldn't figure out why they were so scared. They didn't see anything. They just heard these noises, but they felt fear. They felt just unnatural fear, just unwarranted. There was nothing to be so scared about that they were aware of at this point. So they kind of chuckle and laugh, and they open up the divider, and they, you know, they're hanging out. They're all sitting kind of quasi in a circle on the floor at this point, just talking about whatever. As they're doing so, something starts hitting the tent. Thump, thump. And it sounded like little rocks hitting the tent. So they're like, what the hell is it starting to rain? They thought maybe hail was starting to come because of the clouds moving in and stuff. You know, it's not far-fetched. So they're sitting there, and it's not all over. It's just one side of the tent that keeps getting hit by this rock. So they decide, okay, because of Dennis and Maria's entryway on their side of the tent, someone could go out that entryway, obscuring them leaving the tent from whatever's throwing these rocks, right? They wanted to see what was going on. So Chuck, being the bravest of the bunch, according to Billy, grabs his shotgun, goes out their portion of the exit, goes around, comes back to the backside, and starts peeking around the tent. As he's doing so, he could still hear the rocks hitting the tent, and he can hear some whooshing of the brush on the opposite side of their camp, their camping area. So he's like, what the hell? So he jumps out with the shotgun real quick and yells, hey, stop throwing rocks. He thought maybe locals had followed him. They're having some fun or something. He didn't know. So as he jumps out and yells this, all of a sudden he sees dark brown in the brush move away. As it's moving away, it had to have hit one of those trip things, because bam, the round went off. So this thing, all he saw was some brown in the brush. Nothing definitive. The brown in the brush trips one of their little shotgun proximity alerts, and all of a sudden, sounds like a freight train just boom, barreling away, heading back towards Lake Nurka proper. Just tears off. So immediately he's like shook. He didn't know what that was. And then heard the trip alarm and figured, okay, that's one big freaking bear. That is one huge bear, because of all the noise it made. Everyone else came out, armed of course, trying to figure out, and they could all listen to this thing move away. As they're doing so, a couple moments pass, things are calming down. They're like, what? That was one big bear. So they decide, let's go reset that trip alarm, readjust it, and, you know, make sure all the other ones are up and ready to function. So they go over, Billy and Chuck, they go over. Chuck is standing guard. They're looking for signs of this thing that was in the brush, and they saw nothing. They saw a couple broken limbs and some disrupted kind of vegetation, but nothing definitive. Again, they're quasi on like gravelly, mossy stuff, so there wasn't really any impressions to be spoken of at this point. So they reset it. They make sure all the other lines, their little tripwires, are all set and good, and then they retreat back to the campground. Now they had to go into the vegetation a little ways. While they were in the vegetation, Dennis and Maria were hearing the whistling again, and it was at a distance, but they were hearing that same crisp, sharp whistle. So Billy and Chuck get back over to the camping area, and they're like, listen. And as they're being quiet, not a sound. And they were like, what are we listening for? And then they're just like, quiet. And then all of a sudden, from behind the tent, they hear that sharp whistle. They all turn. They're about 25 feet from the tent at this point. They all turn around, look in that direction. Something big and brown just goes out of their view. It was like they turned just a moment too late just to catch something brown moving back off into the alder willows, right? So immediately guns are up and they're yelling, hey bear, hey bear. Chuck, being the outdoorsy guy, tells them all, bears don't whistle. And so they're going around the back of the tent. Dennis is staying with Maria. They're staying put. Billy and Chuck are going around both sides of the tent back to where they saw this brown streak. As they get to the back side, Chuck is saying, hey, bears don't fucking whistle, dude. I don't know what that is, but bears don't whistle, and they're not that fucking tall in the shrubs. So whatever that is big. Again, everyone outside of Chuck who's had the most wilderness experience, they're just like, well, what do we do? You know, they're looking at Chuck for guidance. And Billy said they put a lot of pressure on Chuck for answers, and he didn't have any. And they felt bad after. But in those moments of terror, because they didn't know what the hell was going on, they were relying heavily on Chuck's outdoor knowledge. So movement, it goes off. They hear it moving, but they didn't want to follow because of how large it was. He said, the initial brush behind the tent was about 5 to 6 foot tall, and then there was taller alders behind that went up to about 12-ish foot tall. He's guesstimating. This thing was almost as tall as the background shrubbery. So they saw from what would be halfway up its body move away from them. They're totally freaked out. So they're figuring, okay, we need to, time passes after this. They settle down, they all decide to start cooking. So what they end up doing is they make a half moon shape with their chairs all facing back behind the tent. Not the brightest, because then they got their back to a whole lot of area. Anyway, so they're in this half moon shape around their little fire pit. They're cooking, they're discussing, they're debating. Bigfoot comes up. They start talking about what they know about Bigfoot because of the size, the color of it, and just the weirdness. So they discuss Bigfoot, and they don't have really much. And so they decide, okay, well, we'll just play it by ear. Now, it gets on into evening and gets into dusk. And once it gets into dusk, everyone is tired. Their adrenaline's been dumping all day. They decide, okay, let's move the tent from where it's at more into the center of this gravelly area instead of over by those bushes. And that way we'll center it in between our trip circumference, you know, where they got the trip lines. So they rearrange everything. They have to shuffle some rocks because, you know, it's uneven ground and stuff. And while they're doing that, Dennis and Maria, they're standing watch, keeping an eye around. Again, they're all their focus is in the last place they saw this thing. So anytime they're doing anything, they're constantly looking back to that point, which is a mistake, because obviously they move around. As they're doing so, Dennis and Maria are critiquing, oh, you want to pull that, you know, that leg of the thing out, that they're getting the tent, you know, squared away or whatever. As they're doing so, a rock hits the tent, and it came from behind them. They turn around because they saw the rock hit. They turn around, and about 100 yards away, they're guesstimating, and they've self-admitted they're not the best at distance, but they're guessing about 100 yards away, they saw that big dark brown figure. Now it's silhouetted and looks almost black. You can barely make out the brown, standing off in the brush almost 100 yards away. Immediately, Maria screams. Chuck and Billy stop what they're doing, jump up and look, and all of them turn and see this thing standing silhouetted in the brush almost 100 yards away, rough, give or take. They're not, again, they self-proclaimed they weren't the best with distance, but they're guessing. Freak out. Rifles up, start screaming, hey, you know, we're over here, you're not allowed to be here, you know, just whatever they were yelling. They were trying to make a bunch of noise. This thing, according to what Billy said, calmly did a 180 and walked off into the brush to where they couldn't see it. It was just obscured by the shadows and gone. So now they're super freaked out. They're like, that's a freaking Bigfoot. We need to do something. Well, they knew they weren't getting out of there immediately. They had 3 more days before the flight came back in, where they were supposed to meet their bush plane at Lake Nurka. Now, they knew this. So what they did was, as a group, they all went and gathered firewood as much as they could together. They hand chopped down some beetle-killed spruce. They did what they had to do to get a large amount of firewood. They didn't get a nap. They're tired. They've been all the traveling and stuff, so they're exhausted at this point, according to what Billy was saying. Like, but they were so adrenalized from what was going on, they weren't gonna just go to bed. You know what I mean? So they get the fire going. They're busy chopping away. They're using their little hand saws and stuff, making, you know, bucking it up into usable pieces. Which they could have just slid it in as it burned down, but they were new to it. So anyway, so they were doing what they felt they had to do to get enough firewood to keep it light around this little open gravelly kind of area they were in. Now, as they're doing so, they get to a point to where Chuck had just got done whacking at the tree with the hatchet that they had, and basically stuck it in it and just left it there and was like, I'm done for now, kind of taking a break. So they all retreat back around to the fire they got going, and now they're set around to where everyone can see over everyone else's shoulder, so nothing can come up from behind them. At this point, it still wasn't dark yet, but it was dusk enough to where, anyway. So as they're doing so, Dennis breaks out. He had brought along some whiskey, so they start taking sips and passing it around to calm the nerves. As they're doing so, they hear what sounds like a hellacious scream. According to what Billy said, it sounded like it was happening all around them at once, kind of scream. And he said it was really low and really high pitched at the same time. It was so loud they were all putting their hands over their ears. So as soon as that scream stops, they all jump up, right? Because while the scream's going on, they're kind of hunkered down, like, what the hell? Scream stops, they all jump up, turn around, facing opposite ways from each other with the guns to try to figure out what the hell. Now, Maria just had one of the guys' handguns, and she was really freaked out. So Dennis, seeing this, said, come stand by me, give me the handgun, because she could have accidentally hurt somebody. She was so freaked out. She hands him the pistol. He tucks it in his coat pocket, and as they're sitting there discussing what's going on, just on that backside where the tent was earlier, where they first saw the brown light, they see eye shine from the flames from the fire not far into that shrub, and they just happened to be looking that direction. And he said they were less than 40 feet from that when they saw the eye shine way up in the brush. Freaked him out. Chuck saw it because he heard them talking and was kind of looking around everywhere. Noticed it when they noticed it. Came running over beside them, pulled up the shotgun and says, you get out of here or I'm going to shoot you. Get out of here or I'm going to shoot you. Well, not a noise was made, so he shoots into the air in that direction. The eyes disappear. It was dark. They didn't see any movement, but they couldn't, even if there was movement. It was just too dark. They didn't, there was nothing they could really make out other than the eye shine was gone. So now everyone's hyper vigilant. They're freaked out, and they decide, okay, we're gonna have to do this in shifts. When some of us need to get some sleep, others to sleep, to stay on guard. Dennis and Maria volunteered to stand guard first, and Chuck and Billy are like, no, you two get some sleep. We'll stay up as late as we can, and then you guys can relieve us towards the morning. They were all amped up. Dennis and Maria get in there. Dennis wasn't able to sleep. Maria fell asleep after crying for a bit and whatnot, and after she calmed down and felt safe with Dennis and more in an enclosed environment, which false sense of security, however, it helped her fall asleep. So it's going on. Nothing's happening. It's dead quiet most of the night. Now, from what Billy said, him and Chuck were sipping the whiskey and putting a little bits in their coffee. So they'd take a little sip and put some in their coffee and sip their coffee or whatever. They weren't getting drunk. They weren't like chugging it down or anything like that. They were just taking sips every once in a while, passing it around, trying to lose the edge they were on. They were on the verge of freaking the fuck out. As the morning started coming on and they started, the light was getting brighter off in the distance to the east, and it was getting lighter. Everything was still pitch black as far as silhouettes and whatnot as far as trees are concerned. They started cracking jokes with each other just out of to relieve some of the stress, and they're saying stupid mama jokes. You know, your mama's so fat she jumped in the air, got stuck. You know, just silly stuff, just to break that stress. As they're doing this and start laughing, they hear from the direction they all saw the one turn and walk off into the darkness. They heard an imitation of Chuck's laugh, because he had a very unique laugh. They heard an imitation of it from that same direction. Instantly, all laughing stopped. Freaked them out. So they stay quiet. Dennis hears them, because Dennis didn't fall asleep, but he didn't want to wake Maria up because she had just fallen asleep not too long before, and he wanted her to rest. So he's in the tent listening, and speaks out to let them know, hey, what was that? Because he heard the imitation of the laugh. Billy and Chuck laughed. Chuck laughed the loudest second, and then immediately after that was the imitation laugh, which was identical. Very creepy stuff. So, you know, they say, oh, we don't know, whatever. Things go on. They sit back down. They're looking in that direction. They're on point, man. They're damn near schizophrenic with their panic. Yeah, and I don't blame them, because that's some real creepy stuff happening, and it's dark all around them. You know what I mean? They're keeping the fire going. They're trying to laugh it off, and then this crap's happening, so they're freaked out, at their wits' end. It gets on closer to daylight, and Chuck is really feeling stressed out and needs to lay down. He's getting a headache from just the stress of everything. So Dennis wakes up Maria. They come out, and Billy was still wound up. And Chuck went in, figured, okay, three sets of eyes, I'm good. He crashes out for a couple hours. He gets up, comes out. It's more daylight. Everyone's calmed down. There's birds chirping and stuff now, and so it feels a lot more natural surroundings and not so ominous. Everyone calms down. Chuck is up, tells everyone else, hey, you guys look exhausted. Get some sleep. I'll cook us something. I'll keep an eye out. Things seem calm. There's birds chirping and stuff. No predators are around. You guys get sleep. They all retreat in there quickly. They're all dead dog tired. And they get some sleep. Chuck cooks a breakfast. Still bird sounds and stuff. He's feeling calm. He's not feeling watched like he had been most of the night. And he was, excuse me, just finishing up percolating some coffee for everyone to go with the breakfast he had just made. And as he was doing so, he set the coffee, little percolating pot, little aluminum job, on a rock next to the fire. And no sooner than he let go of that handle, a little rock from off to his right hand side came and binked, hit that coffee pot, and the little pebble bounced back into the fire. Immediately he stands up and looks that direction, and in the darkness of the trees, he's guesstimating, again, they weren't very good with range. He said about 50 to 60 yards, just on the opposite side of a little bitty, nothing of a stream, little creek thing. This thing was standing there, all dark and silhouetted, and he just looked at it and said, and yells out, hey, get the hell out of here, I'm gonna shoot you. So he raises the firearm, and as soon as he does, he said this thing, because it was dark and silhouetted, he couldn't see all the movement, but he noticed that it very rapidly disappeared into the darkness, like super fast. He said as he was bringing up the gun yelling, it was already motioning and was gone. Freaked out. Everyone heard that, him yelling and stuff. They all come out with the guns and stuff, and as they do so, Billy, who was the last one coming out, says to him, hey, where's forgive me, he was looking for where he had set down the other rifle, because he left it outside in case Chuck needed another rifle. And Chuck said it's laying over by the fire. So Billy's looking for the rifle, and as he's doing so, the rifle was right in front of his face. It just got obscured by some of the stuff he was using to cook earlier, and so he wasn't seeing it initially. So he's kind of rummaging through stuff, you know, their cookware and stuff, and then sees the butt of it. And just as he reaches to grab the butt of the rifle to pull it out, his shoulder gets hit by a small pebble. Like, weirded out, he turns around and looks behind them where they initially had saw the brown streak from behind the tent before they moved it. There was silhouette standing there. So he grabs the rifle, turns around, this thing gone, takes off. They hear this time though, they hear it take off and away from them. They're all fried at this point. They have a couple more days before this plane comes back. So they all quickly eat, quickly pack up things, get things squared away, people on guard. They make their way back down towards Ott Bay, where they initially were going to be at the cabin. So they had, you know, 10 miles to hike through rough terrain, you know, to get back to where they wanted to be, somewhere else near a structure, and there was a cabin there. So they packed up their stuff, they went on down. It took them most of the day to packing everything, you know, there's 4 of them, just maneuvering and negotiating, making a trail when they had to get back over to Ott Bay at Nurka Lake there by Joe's Creek where this cabin was. They get back over there, no one's there. The people who were using it were probably out on a skiff somewhere fishing or whatever, so they right there on the beach, they start setting their stuff down and they're just chilling. Along the walk through that stuff, they would periodically, a rock would be thrown. They would hear a sharp whistle at a distance. They stated that every step of the way out of there, coming back towards Lake Nurka proper, felt like they were being walked out, watched, stalked, all of it. That they said the hair didn't go down on their necks until they almost got to that cabin, and then everything dissipated. They ended up negotiating with the people who had a skiff with them that were staying at the cabin to get a ride back to Aleknagik, and so they ended up getting a ride back there and ended their trip a couple days early. But he's looking for photographs that they had taken. Hopefully he gets them to me in time for this video. If not, I'll post them on the website. But I want to thank them for sharing their experience there at Rainbow Basin. Just creepy stuff. It seemed like there was just a constant, consistent pestering. Terrifying for those who have never dealt with it, and even for those who have. The ominous figure in the darkness, the whistles, the groaning, it just creepy stuff. I want to thank Billy for getting the whole thing together from different perspectives, because I was having a hard time getting a hold of Dennis to talk to him about him and Maria's thing, and Chuck as well. So Billy did that for me, and I appreciate it, Billy. Shout out to Colorado, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.